The Hiring Process, Part 3, Interviewing and Selection. In this module, we will take a closer look at the screening, interviewing, and selection process. Our objectives: upon completion of this module, participants will understand the selection process. They will understand the purpose and forms of interviewing, and they will appreciate that there are various questions that should be avoided during the interview process. One of the first things that comes to mind when advertising or interviewing for a position is credentials. When it comes to identifying what credentials will be required for a position, it's important to ask what is necessary, what is actually required to perform the position. What is fair? Are we being fair? Can an individual readily obtain the required credentials? How will we collect information regarding credentials? Will we ask for verification on the application? Will we verify these credentials? Verification of credentials is very important. There have been incidences of forgery of credentials. Early in my career, I took a position to coordinate EMS coverage for a major sporting event complex. The position became vacant after a state-imposed investigation revealed that the prior coordinator, who was not an EMT, had allowed an individual to work with a forged EMT card for 2 years. In this situation, the individual had a card that had a certification date that had been altered. So even if you have what looks like a valid credential, it's often worth the effort to validate its authenticity. Many states have developed credentialing verification systems for this purpose. Job applications. Job applications are the most common way in which individuals express interest in a position. In addition to information regarding credentialing, the application often obtains biographical data regarding the individual's past and specific job abilities. This may include information about past experiences and past positions. In addition to applications, many organizations also ask individuals to submit resumes, CVs, and reference letters. There are several factors that must be kept in mind with these additional documents. All 3 of these documents have been designed by employees to create a perception. I like the way my friend and fellow EMS consultant Mike Tagman says it. Applications are not reality. They're the perception of reality created by the employee to create a specific impression upon the reader. So sometimes the best resumes, CVs, or reference letters may not represent the best employee. Another question that you must answer is how will you accept resumes and applications? Will you accept applications continuously? Or will you only accept them when the position is vacant? If you decide to accept applications continuously, how long will you keep them on active file? It's a good idea to have a policy on this and to inform individuals when they submit the application. Once you have a pool of applicants, you're ready to evaluate the applications to determine who will be brought in for a more in-depth interview. It is important that the individual have an understanding of the position. It's important that the individual screening the applications have a good understanding of the position. On occasion, applicants may have equal credentials or qualifications that may be named differently. For example, you may have advertised that you want a paramedic applicant to hold a basic trauma life support certification, but the applicant previously worked for an organization that had certified individuals in pre-hospital trauma life support. If the individual screening applications were not aware of the similarities between these 2 types of certification, the applicant may be deemed disqualified and may not get an interview. It is also important that the individual performing the screening be consistent in the way that they screen applicants. Ideally, individuals should follow a script that will prevent any possible concerns of discrimination. The idea of the screening process is to determine who meets the essential position requirements and who will be considered for further consideration. One last note: the screening process should be valid. As was pointed out in the discussion of job analysis in Part 1, only tasks, skills, and traits that are absolutely essential to the performance of a position should be required for a position. Anything that falls out of this realm should be considered desirable traits. A clear understanding of the actual requirements can help prevent issues related to discrimination. The interview process. The purpose of the interview process is to confirm information that was provided and to obtain answers for any outstanding questions that have arisen during screening. The validity of interviews has been a subject of great debate. It seems that there are many concerns. One of the biggest concerns is the potential biases that can exist within the interviewer. Interviewers have a tendency to choose applicants that are similar to them regardless of their qualifications or the applicant potential. Even though it may be unintentional, this can lead to issues of discrimination. Another concern that was mentioned earlier is that interviewers may ask inappropriate questions, again leading to this concern of discrimination. We will discuss this issue further later in this module. For these reasons, it is important that the individual involved in the interview process understand the risk associated with interviewing, and that the organization take actions to ensure that interviewers understand their role. One of the best ways to do this is to have consistency in the manner in which applicants are interviewed. The first step in interview consistency is determining what type of interview process will be used. Here are a few types of interviews that are used by different EMS organizations. There's structured interviews. There's structured versus unstructured interviews. As was noted earlier, it's important that the applicant interviews be consistent. So unstructured interviews are, or should be, falling out of favor, except for maybe very high-level positions. Even then, structured interviews help prevent bias on the part of the interviewer. Situational interviews involve giving applicants various situations and then having them describe how they would handle a given situation. Next is behavioral interviews. Behavioral interviews involve evaluation of past behaviors. This form of interviewing is gaining popularity in that one of the best predictors of future behavior is past behavior. Another form of interview is the stress interview. Here the applicant is placed in a stress environment and asked to perform. The problem with this approach is that it's difficult to know if the stress of the interview affects the applicant differently than stress that may be encountered in a given work situation. Panel interviews. Panel interviews can be used in conjunction with any of these types of interviews, the interviews previously mentioned. It is beneficial to do panel interviews in that they help prevent bias on the part of the interviewers and help maintain consistency. Finally, a commonly used interview method for hiring EMS personnel is the assessment center. Assessment centers place candidates in various situations and look at their performance. The most important thing to remember in assessment centers is that the tasks required of the applicant should be tasks that are required for the position. There is a history of litigation associated with asking applicants to perform actions that have not been validated to represent tasks that would be encountered in a given position. Example questions. Remember that the purpose of the interview is to obtain information that is not provided on the applicant's application. Here are some simple interview questions. Tell me about your previous EMS experiences. Does it bother you when a patient gets upset? How would you deal with these type situations? How do you feel and how do you react when you make a mistake? When you aren't busy, what do you do? Describe a conflict that you've encountered with the previous supervisor and discuss how you dealt with it. Of course, your specific questions will largely rest upon what is included in the position's job specifications. Some questions should be avoided during the interview process. You should take care to avoid questions that concern gender. Hiring based on whether an applicant is male or female is illegal. You should be careful in deciding that a specific gender is required in a position. The best protection to this would be to hire without any knowledge of an applicant's gender. This, however, is virtually impossible. It is usually something that is observed and obvious during the interview. You can, however, prevent bias during the screening process by simply ignoring the candidate's name until it's needed to contact the applicant for an interview. You should avoid questions that ask about national origin. Questions that may violate this restriction include asking applicants where they were born. You can see how the question has no relevance in determining who is most capable of performing the functions of a specific job. You should resist from asking about marital status. Here again, this line of questioning has no relevance. When it comes to disability questions should be phased in the context of whether an individual is capable of performing the tasks required in the position being applied for. Remember here, the Americans with Disability Act requires that you make reasonable accommodations in the workplace to facilitate a disabled person's ability to perform a specific task. Issues around disability commonly arise in the hiring situation. I have seen this in regard to applicants with physical challenges such as being deaf or missing a limb. Remember, if they can perform the required task, you should in no way discriminate against them in the hiring process. Another area that should be avoided is that of religion. In the EMS environment, there are often concerns of a person's ability to work variable shifts. These shifts may include working Saturdays and/or Sundays. It is okay to ask if an employee has a problem working these types of shifts. However, you are required to make reasonable accommodations to support an employee's religious beliefs. One exception to the situation is when it places undue hardship upon the organization. If this practice arises, you should seek legal counsel to help you determine if the situation constitutes undue hardship. Of course, race is another area to avoid. You need to be especially careful here, as you usually don't have to ask about race, as you will already have the perception of it from the interaction with the candidate. Another area of question that you should avoid is that of the applicant's credit history. There are some exceptions to this. If your EMS organization is in the process of hiring a chief financial officer, you can obtain such information as it has some relevance to the position at hand. You should avoid questions regarding the female applicant's intention to get pregnant or whether she is currently pregnant. I have worked with organizations such as Air Medical Programs that had specific medically based policies regarding how far into her pregnancy an employee could work. If a pregnant candidate is offered a position in an environment that has such a policy, it is appropriate to ask the question regarding the pregnancy that are necessary to enforce a work restriction policy. Similarly, it is inappropriate to ask the applicant if they have any plans to have children. Finally, you would like to know if the applicant has a criminal record. Here, while you are permitted to ask the applicant if they have ever been convicted of a criminal offense, you are not permitted to ask the applicant about prior arrest records. Just remember, an applicant is innocent until proven guilty. In addition to the formal interview, some organizations have employees perform specific selection tests. These can include tests of cognitive ability, verbal comprehension, quantitative ability, reasoning ability, physical ability, work sample personality test, and EMS-specific knowledge test. If you plan to use such tests as part of the hiring process, it's important to use validated tests and to ensure that the individual administering the test has been qualified to administer a given test. I know of an organization that has historically asked applicants to name all the cranial nerves in order as part of the hiring process. Can you validate the relevance of this in court? I'm not sure. Luckily, the organization has never been tested on it, The important point, though, is that you should make sure that the instrument that you're using has been validated as a test of the abilities and skills necessary to perform the functions of a given position. There are some sources of pre-employment information that probably should be avoided unless you have a very compelling reason to use them. These include things such as polygraph tests, honesty tests, and graphology or writing tests. In some situations, these tests are appropriate. If you have questions, you should consult legal counsel to see if they're appropriate in your environment. One final source of pre-employment information that you would like to have is a history of the applicant's past employment. Unfortunately, this is very difficult to obtain, as most employers are reluctant to provide detailed information regarding the applicant's past employment. This is primarily due to the fears of retaliation, usually in the form of legal action. Now that you have interviewed qualified applicants, you're ready to make a selection. After you've considered the applicant's background, information obtained during the interview, and selection testing results that you may have asked the applicant to take, you will likely have more than one qualified applicant. Now you need to make a decision. Groups often feel compelled to hire the most qualified applicant. A better approach is to hire the applicant that best matches your job specifications. As you recall, in an earlier module, we discussed the importance of conducting a thorough job analysis for the purpose of identifying job specifications. If you created this job specification, you should now be able to determine which applicants will best fit these job specifications. In this module, we have taken a look at the interview selection process. In particular, we have briefly reviewed the legal risks associated with interviewing, the various types of interviews, and additional sources of pre-employment information.